Scott, Cliff, great to have you here, but I just have to ask you, guys, what does an angel put in their salsa to make it extra spicy?
I don't know what.
Jalapeno peppers.
Oh.
All right, now here's another one. Terrible. Here's another one. What is an angel's favorite weapon? A harpoon gun. Harpoon gun. Hey, everybody. Wow. Welcome to What Magic Is. This is a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the supernatural, the paranormal, and the weird. My goodness, today we have an episode that has probably been one of the most requested episodes I've ever done. Now, I have previously done an episode about John Dee, and as soon as that episode was released, I had about 500 people dogpile on and be like, when are you going to talk about Enochian magic? When are you going to talk about the magic that was received by John Dee and Edward Kelley? When are you going to talk about it? And initially I was kind of being like, I don't know if I even want to cover it. But as time progressed, I realized it has to be covered. It is such an interesting segment of magical history. And today I have two individuals that are here to talk about it. I can't think of any other two people I would want to have to talk about this than these two. So my first guest is Scott Stenwick, who is a Thelemite and ritual magician who has been practicing for more than 30 years. He has a degree in experimental psychology from St. Olaf College and has been involved in the Ordo Templi Orientis since 1995 and Masonry since 1997, initially intending to write one giant book about the Enochian universe. Instead, he has blessed us with three excellent books in a series called Mastering Enochian Magic. The one and only Scott Stenwick. Scott, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
My next guest is Cliff. Cliff is an eclectic magician who has over 20 years of experience with mostly Golden Dawn style ceremonial magic. Since first dabbling in Enochian magic in 2014, Cliff eventually started his blog, Enochian Today, which is a virtual treasure trove of Enochian related material. Armed with perhaps the greatest smile in modern occulture, welcome, Cliff Wigtil. I love it. Cliff, don't be bashful about it. Anytime I see a video interview with you, I was like, man, that guy has got a fantastic smile.
Now you're going to make me blush. That's very kind of you to say.
Gentlemen, let's get down to business here. And I'm going to bring the heat with the first question. What is Enochian magic?
Well, I could define Enochian magic as a mystico-magical system, which includes an Enochian language and Enochian alphabet that was received by John Dee and Edward Kelley. And it's angelic in nature.
Scott, can you add to that at all?
I would add to that so the Enochian system coming from the 1580s it's kind of like the natural evolution of the grimoire magic that came before it. You have a lot of the same kinds of elements as you find in the earlier grimoires, a number of elements similar to what you find in Agrippa. But Dee and Kelly added their own. There's a lot of original material in it. There's a lot of stuff that they got that isn't maybe is analogous to things that are found other places, but it's not really the same. And one of my working hypotheses about grimoire magic is that probably all the old grimoires were developed using processes like this, where you had a magician who got in contact with spirits and got spirit sigils and got seals and got all this kind of stuff and put it all together. But we don't have any of that. In the Enochian system, we actually have the lab notes that created the system. And that is one of the things that is so fascinating about it. You're like, all right, you can actually go through this and see, all right, well, so this is where it came from. This is what was said and so forth. And so it is wonderful in the sense that it is really the only record like that exists really in the world. Certainly up until the modern era, you've got, you have Crowley's work, like Vision of the Voice has some stuff that comes out of it, which is also Enochian. You've got some of the chaos magic stuff that came out. People really documented what they were doing with it. But Enochian is by far the earliest, where we've got these notes and this information about how the whole system works and how it's put together.
Amazing. So I have to ask, why is it even called Enochian magic? John Dee never called it Enochian when he was alive, did he? So why this name Enochian?
Well, it's like the pseudonymous thing that they did with magic. Grimoires in the period were often attributed to Solomon or Enoch. Solomon didn't write the Key of Solomon either. The reason it gets called Enochian magic is because if you look at Dee's prayers and stuff like that, he's talking about, how God walked with Enoch, and, I pray that, I will have the same kind of revelation. There's a section in it where the angels talk about, well, this was the prayer recited by Enoch that like elevated him to speak with God and things like that. So the idea of the legend of Enoch is important to the Enochian system. Dee was also interested in obtaining the Book of Enoch, which is a text that we have today. Dee was never able to actually find a copy of it, though, back in the day. And he had heard of it, and it was this kind of semi-legendary thing. So he was trying to get, part of what he was trying to do with these angels was get the information that he could otherwise have found in the Book of Enoch. And so that's where the connection comes in, and that's why modern magicians use that name to refer to it.
Got it. Wonderful. So how did Enochian magic come to be? What is the history of Enochian magic itself?
Dee really is the main origin of the system. His focus was kind of this interesting, unified, it was sort of proto-scientific view of, and he was trying to get a system that basically unified all the different fields of knowledge, which he called archmastery. And his main focus was really going back to some first principles. So the idea of light, because in Genesis, one of the first thing God says is, let there be light, and there's light. And he says it. And that's the important thing, because then it plays into this idea of a divine language whereby God actually creates. And so Dee's thinking, okay, if I can get into these initial things, then we can sort of work to decorrupt the world and make it easier for mankind to get out of sin and all of that. So very much a Christian focus. And he initially tried with this thing called the Monas Hieroglyphica, which is this symbol that was supposed to unite absolutely everything and be mathematically precise and stuff like that. And again, it seems to be that his goal in working with the angels was trying to find a new means of obtaining wisdom. And angels, of course, have long been associated with the heavens and with light. And of course, angels speak to humanity. So you kind of get that same idea, except he just transfers it over to a whole class of spiritual beings.
I love it. So one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, either of you or both of you, but Dee and Edward Kelley, they received this system of magic that is used today called Enochian magic. But did they ever use it? Did they ever use what they were received, or did they just kind of keep doing what they were doing once they already had the results of receiving the system itself?
There's a really interesting thing that you notice when you go through the Heptarchia Mystica, that the Heptarchia Mystica is like the Enochian system of planetary magic. It's based on, you have a king and a prince, and they correspond to the 7 days of the week. Okay, and for Tuesday, the prince, an entity called Bafafes, Dee has this conjuration that he's written for the prince. And the kings and princes, they all have these conjurations that are laid out. And Dee says, various things about this. Like, you said this, when we contacted you, and, you appeared this way. And he's kind of enumerating the characteristics of the spirit in the conjuration for that spirit. Well, the one for Bafafes is much, much longer than any of the other ones. And it has these personal details in it, like you assisted me, you were with me in extremis, and all this kind of stuff, in the version of the Heptarchia Mystica that was published in 1588. Okay. Bafafes' powers are winning naval battles, reducing enemy ships, and all sorts of things like that. 1588 was the year the Spanish Armada attacked England. The Spanish Armada was defeated semi-miraculously by bizarre weather events, including running into a North Atlantic hurricane, which almost never happens. And, Dee is like, oh, you were with me in extremis. We know that he did build the Holy Table. The Holy Table is especially used for heptarchial magic. I use it for the whole system, but it's definitely used for heptarchial magic. And that suggests to me that John Dee conjured Bafafes to defeat the Spanish Armada. And if that was a usage of Enochian magic, that is an event that changed the entire course of history, potentially. I mean, if the Spanish had conquered England and they had more than enough troops to do it, we'd be speaking Spanish today. I mean, the world would be completely different.
Something to keep in mind for sure. Yeah. I love it. So I have to ask, and I'll ask this to you, Cliff. how did John Dee and Edward Kelley converse with angels? What was their process?
Yeah, so mainly a lot of prayer, a lot of being penitent, and if the angels scolded them, they had to, kind of go over be even more penitent than they were before. And we have on record John Dee's supplication to God and to try to get the angels to appear. But really, the main way that they appeared was John Dee would sort of, be taking notes, and Edward Kelley would look through a crystal, which is sort of like the prototype of a crystal ball today, known as a shoe stone, or we would call it a show stone, a stone that shows you stuff. And so that was the main way. And there is a note that John Dee says, well, I can't really see too well, but if I close my eyes, I can see stuff. And the angels really approved of that. So that's actually my approach now, is if ever I use that, I don't even bother with a mirror or anything. I just close the eyes, because it turns out that the eye is also something that focuses light.
So Dee would close his eyes and say, or was it
No,
Kelley?
it was just a one-off. So Kelley would actually look
Yeah.
into the stone.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I covered that a bit in my episode. Yeah, it's weird to me that this really austere system of magic that everybody knows about, and most likely a lot of, like, I don't know from the sessions that we have between Dee and Kelly if they ever used it. But again, there's this, and I'm sorry for listeners if this gets a little bit long here and overbearing, but there was another gentleman by the name of Bartholomew Hickman that Dee did, I think, the vast majority of his scrying with, and we have no record of anything that they talked about at all. So perhaps he might have been using this thing that was received. I don't know. Can any of you speak to that?
I know that Skinner's copy of the diaries, there's just a very small snippet, and the style is completely different. But supposedly he's receiving a message from, I think it was Raphael. But the style of the channeler, or the scryer, or the psychic, however you want to put it, was way different.
For sure. Yeah. So without getting too deep into the content of these, you've got Dee receiving this system, and there seems to be 5 revealed books by John Dee, which are very crucial to our understanding of Enochian magic. So let's go through some of them. So the first one, Scott, what is Liber Loga, or Logath, or however it is pronounced?
Liber Loga is actually it's pronounced Loga, like Logah, Loga. It's spelled Loagaeth, but it's pronounced Loga. So Loga is kind of is an interesting piece that Dee got almost no explanation about what it was for. It's a section of this language, which is not the same language as the angelic keys. They've done computer analysis between the two. It has characteristics of a natural language, but it has almost no overlap with the keys. So it's like, what the language that usually gets called angelic or Enochian is the language of the keys. So we have like Enochian dictionaries for. Loga is like, well, it's got a bunch of these words that are like, some sort of divine language. The word loga means speech from God, according to the angels. And it's arranged into 49 leaves or pages. And there are no English translations or anything of it. You just have like a series of words in spots. You have like grids of letters. It's really, and Dee got this, and it's not really clear what he did with it, what you do with it. Various authors have speculated on it, but it's kind of an enigmatic piece, because you've got the other books, the things like the angelic keys. He's given some information about how to do that. The books of mystery layout, the earlier books of mystery layout, that Heptarchial system has instructions, but Loga is this thing. It's like this speech in this language that we don't have any translation for, and it's not really clear what you do with it.
There's another book that you mentioned as well, or you mentioned some part of it that we'll talk about a little bit later. But Scott, what is De Heptarchia Mystica?
So the Heptarchia Mystica is the earliest portion, the earliest grimoire-like portion of the Enochian system. It is a system that is similar to some of the other grimoires of the period, like the Heptameron or the Arbitel. And it's a system where you have a king and a prince that you conjure, and they correspond to the 7 days of the week. And they have different powers, depending on the day and so on. The powers, they don't necessarily 100% line up planetary. They don't 100% line up zodiacally. It's kind of a mix between the two. But so in the Heptarchia Mystica, it lays out how you make the holy table, how you build, the different pieces of temple equipment that correspond to Enochian. It talks about the ring, talks about the lamen and the robe and some of that stuff. And the deal is that, in a way, it's like the Heptarchia is sort of like, all right, so we're taking the grimoire stuff that currently exists, this planetary structure in grimoires, really common in the period, really common in the Renaissance. And Dee is taking, kind of putting, the angels are talking to Dee, and they're giving him this similar thing that's kind of putting the Enochian angelic spin on that kind of a structure. I wrote my book, Mastering the Mystical Heptarchy, the first Enochian book I published, because nobody had written a book on the Heptarchia Mystica up to that point. And it was covered, as like parts in other books, but Mystical Heptarchy really focuses on working with the Heptarchia Mystica. And I think it's a good starting place for people wanting to learn Enochian, because it's not nearly, you don't nearly have like a complex array of names and all this kind of stuff that you find in the other material, which is quite a bit more complicated. I mean, you have a total of 16 spirits that you're dealing with in the Heptarchia. You have a king and prince for each of the 7 days of the week. Then you have a king and a prince that rule over the whole system. So those are all the names you need to know. You need to kind of have an understanding of these are the planetary days. The Heptarchia Mystica talks about hours, but it's pretty clear that hours aren't necessarily even used with it. It talks about how like the ministers rule different parts of the day, but when you conjure the king and the prince, the ministers just show up anyway. So the one that rules whatever is always going to be there, so you don't really need to worry about that. And if you're familiar with like the Arbitel or the Heptameron or some of these other grimoires, the Heptarchia is very similar. It's just a matter of, you've got some different conjurations, you've got some different spirit names, you've got some different spirit seals that you're using. And then you have this kind of custom temple furniture with the holy table, the Sigillum Dei Aemeth and stuff like that. But otherwise, the structure is not really that complex. And they're powerful. They're relatively easy to work with. And I've had real good results with them.
Amazing. So, Cliff, there's 2 books I'm going to kind of like lump together here. So there's Liber Scientiae. I'm not going to go for the rest of the Latin on there. And then the 48 Claves Angelicae. What can you tell me about these 2 reveal books?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the second one. So the 48 calls, the Enochian calls or keys, we call them calls because you're kind of calling out to the angels and stuff like that. And this is where we get the most of our translations of the Enochian words and the Enochian in the Enochian language. And so each of these, the Heptarchia Mystica that Scott was mentioning, that Heptarchy, you're basically using calls 1 and 2, the first 2 spoken calls. The angels also said there's another call, but it's not to be spoken, and it's so there's actually 49. So you get 7 times 7, really feeding into the 7-based nature of Enochian. But each one of them is supposed to be used for various purposes. So the first 19 calls relate to the watchtowers. I'll get to that in a second. And then the first 18 calls, excuse me, and then the last 30 calls are all calls to the aethers. And it's really the same call with the exception of you're substituting one word in there. So you're talking about aethers. So let's go through aethers and then I'll bring it all back to the watchtowers.
Love it.
So the aethers are basically can sort of be thought of as 30 subdivisions between heaven, the God himself, and then earth. So basically 30 heavens instead of 7 heavens, or however many heavens that are supposed to be in Enochian. It's 30. And you can use people approach it different ways, and they have visions and stuff like that. But it's really a kind of a consciousness altering experience. Now, the first 18 calls, those relate more to the watchtowers. So that's really that second part of what you were talking about, the Liber Scientiae, etc., Victoriae Terrestris.
There we go.
So the parts of the earth, right? Terrestris, terrestrial earth. So the physical earth, not the elemental earth. And the whole idea is that there are also, in addition to these things, I'll just be really brief here, 12 zodiacal kings. And of course, the zodiac, if you look at it up in the sky, it's the path that the sun takes around the earth apparently from our point of view. But if you take that circle, so to speak, that orbit, or not the orbit, but you know what I mean, the apparent path, and you were to like slice it up, that's the zodiac, into 12 parts. We kind of are familiar with our astrology. But if you sort of did that for I'll just back up here and say that the 12 zodiacal kings, those each appear with different frequencies, and they are governors over different literal parts of the earth. So Scott has definitely opened the door wide open with his mastering the 30 airs, and those zodiacal kings basically are supposed to be used for political magic on the earth. So if you want something to happen, you can call upon them, and there are certain ones you have to call for certain parts of the earth, for a certain part of the earth, but that's what that whole system is. So you call forward the aether, and then there are 3 parts of the earth associated with that aether, and then you can call upon the appropriate zodiacal king once you've called forward that aether and say, I would like such and such to happen.
I'm going to segue here real quick and basically say, I think that podcasting might be the worst way of trying to explain Enochian magic. And it's not easy.
It's not
I
easy.
hope people just hang in there. Please, everybody hang in. All of this is going to be explained. Please, if there's some stuff that everybody's just like, I don't know, aether and just airs and what tables? Where's the tape? Why are we talking about furniture? Relax, everybody, take a deep breath. We're only 23 minutes into here, all right? So I guarantee everybody listening that this will unspool well. So there's one last revealed book that is interesting. It's called Tabula Bonorum Angelorum. Gentlemen, what is this?
So that is the table of the good angels that corresponds to the Heptarchia Mystica. So the Bonorum are what Dee called the Heptarchial angels, the good angels. And so what that is it's a wheel with the name of the king and the prince, and then the different ministers positioned around the wheel. Essentially, it's like a reference table for the Heptarchia Mystica. It's where the kings and princes of the days are drawn from. That's what the Tabula Bonorum is.
Wonderful. Something that other people might come across. So there's these 5 revealed books, but then there's also these 5 books of mystery. Can any of you speak to, so what is that? Because that's something that you can go into the store and buy. There's Joseph H. Peterson. He's released a wonderful edition. So how is that tied into these revealed books?
So Joseph Peterson's edition, the 5 books of mystery, what that includes the material that makes up the Heptarchia Mystica, the material that makes up Liber Loga, and the Tabula Bonorum. It covers the earlier portion of the Enochian scrying. So then at the end of it, then that goes into the true and faithful relation, picks up where the 5 books of mystery end in terms of the diaries.
Yeah, I always find it interesting. I'm one of those people that I like to see where the source of these things come from. So I really enjoyed looking at the 5 books of mystery, as well as Dee's spiritual diary, I think is what it's called. It was released by Merrick Casaubon, and it really caused this huge upsurge of interest in John Dee after he passed away. But it's kind of got the gentleman who released it, Merrick Casaubon, whose dad basically kicked Hermeticism down a peg. Well, his son basically almost did the same thing with Dee and just tried to be like, look, Dee was tricked by devils. And so, but I'm going to release his diaries. So anyways, I talked about it a bit in my episode. Everybody, please go back and listen to that episode if you can. From these 5 revealed books, we get what are perhaps the 4 key components of Enochian magic. So let's talk shop here. Scott, what is the angelic language Enochian? What is this language?
What it is it's a language. So you mentioned the angelic keys. The angelic keys are in a language, and the language includes English translation of that language. So that's why that the language specifically from the angelic keys is what we have in the Enochian dictionaries and so forth. You can look up different words and stuff. Like Liber Loga also has like some kind of a divine or angelic language in it, but we got no translations, and they are definitely not the same thing. It's been analyzed by a number of different people. And so The idea is that, Agrippa talks about this idea of, if you could speak to angels, in their native tongue, it would be this like amazing thing, like even better than Hebrew, because Hebrew is the divine language, and that according to Agrippa. But even better, we could get this language that would correspond to how the angels actually speak, and that would be fantastic. And it is interesting if you look in Agrippa there's a chapter there that kind of alludes to this idea of talking about angelic language. And we know that Dee read Agrippa. He was very familiar with Agrippa. So probably that's where some of the inspiration for it came from. But the idea is that the angelic key is, you say that they're basically their prayers in the angelic language that you say that are supposed to, open up different regions of the universe and access different powers and things like that. And supposedly they work like that because you're speaking, in the language of the angels themselves. There is some kind of pseudo history in the diaries where the angels are telling you, well, we spoke this angelic language, but then people went on to speak Hebrew and so on. And it's like, well, the angelic language in the Enochian system, Hebrew, they have very little in common. The angelic language that we see in Enochian, the languages it's most similar to actually are English and German, which are two languages that Dee, of course, spoke in terms of like word order and stuff like that. So, so it definitely is something where the language, it's more similar to a European language than anything Semitic. So probably that story about speaking in the Garden of Eden, that probably wasn't true. Or, is only true in a metaphoric sense, not a literal sense. But the idea is that the language has special power because you're speaking in the language of the angels themselves. And to some extent, with Liber Loga, it's supposed to be speech from God. So perhaps that's the language of, God himself is the idea. And so by using those languages, it's the angels lay out that, you can do like really powerful magic with it. And people do find the angelic language very effective in magic. It's used all over the place. You find it in like the Golden Dawn system. You find it in Crowley. A lot of people have picked this up and done stuff with it. Chaos magicians have done some stuff with it. We're just using the language, and it seems like the language is effective in and of itself. Crowley wrote that the Enochian system was powerful because it was one of the only systems of magic he'd ever come across where, at least according to him, you could just like say something in Enochian and something would actually happen. Whereas other systems of magic, you had to work on focus and stuff like that. That was Crowley's opinion. I'm not 100% sure that I think that Enochian is the only system that does that. But I will say that it works pretty effectively, just like following the procedure and so on, as opposed to, some other systems of magic that require, more internal work. Enochian really doesn't talk about internal work much at all. And I've added some of those practices and ideas to my books based on some of the modern stuff that I bring together with the Enochian. And it does make it more effective, but it's pretty effective on its own. It is a very powerful system of magic. And certainly one of the components that's powerful about it is the use of the angelic language and ritual.
Love it. That is a great answer. Thank you for that. Now, Scott wrote a book about this exact thing, but I'm going to kick it to Cliff. So, Cliff, what is the Heptarchic system?
Yeah, just really quickly on the Enochian language. In my experience, I've found that vibrating it is probably it's one of the few language Greek and Hebrew and Enochian. Those are the three that sort of give me some kind of clairaudient sound vibrating those more than, which is not to say that you can't get it from English, but you almost have to like really focus on it. But yeah, Scott got into the mystical heptarchy, and so yeah, the whole idea there is that there's kind of a what's sort of not gotten into as much as I've seen is the idea that these really are these angels do have a very strong planetary focus. So in Scott's work, he can speak better to that than I can. But basically, they've got special. For example, the Prince Blizdon, who is the angelic prince of Wednesday, he is very powerful in the earth and in the bowels of the earth, right? So Wednesday, obviously, we're talking about Mercury, and Mercury is both domiciled and exalted in the sign of Virgo. Virgo is an earth sign. And similarly, we have Mars in Scorpio. That's where it's strongest, especially the first term, and Deccan, and of course that is where he is. Bephaphus is very strong in the waters. His power is in the waters, and not just oceanic waters, but apparently also waters that may lie in the earth, which would be interesting for people looking to find a well, for example, or to dig a well. And so there is this interesting correspondence. Now, um, in terms of practical workings, you can definitely use the angels of the sun, the king and the prince of the sun, for obtaining stuff like wisdom and stuff like that. Basically, each one of them has their own set of powers. And you can use them to, for example, Scott already mentioned ships. The But what would be interesting for people who are, let's say, interested in rockets is that the angelic king and prince over Friday, Balagon and Bagonel, they are they basically are all that can be wrought in aerial actions. So we have Venus in the sign of Libra in that case, and so if you want to do anything in the air, you would probably want to get that angel on your side and make a request. So there's sort of like a real elemental side, but also a bit of a zodiacal side on top of that to those angels, and they have their own list of powers. And there's a lot that can get into, but basically the idea is look up the powers that they have and see which one of them might be useful to you.
Right.
That's what it gets down to from a practical point of view. Same thing, by the way, when you're working with. We kind of didn't quite get into this, but when you're working with the watchtower angels, so the watchtowers did two things. They not only gave you these aethers and these parts of the earth and political magic, but also additional kings, princes who have their own additional powers, which are kind of much more supposed to work on that elemental level as opposed to an astrological magic level.
Love it. I'm going to kick this to you, Scott, because there's a bit of a history as to how, but can you explain what is the four watchtowers, the Great Table, how did it come about, and what is it?
So the Great Table is a layout of all of the different. It's a grid of letters, and from those letters you derive all of the angel names for like the Watchtower kings, princes, quadrant angels. The Golden Dawn called them the cherubic and lesser angels. Also cacodemons. There are demons in the Enochian system that you can pull off the watchtowers, and essentially what it represents is it represents the four directions, which can be attributed to the four elements. Like you have a watchtower matching each direction, and it's like one big grid, so it's a square. So they all fit together into a big square. The Golden Dawn does this thing where they break it up and put the tablets on the wall and stuff. That is a completely modern innovation. It has nothing to do with how Dee used it. The Great Table isn't even temple furniture; it's a reference table. And the Golden Dawn also does this thing where they make the elements primary, which is wrong. The directions are primary. It's very clear from the system. And here's the difference.
Shots fired.
So in the Golden Dawn system, so you break the four quadrants up and you hang them like on the wall of the temple at the directions you're working with. And what they do is there are two elemental models. There's the winds model. That's the one you see everywhere, where it's like air in the east, fire in the south, water in the west, earth in the north. Then there's also the zodiacal model, which is fire in the east, water in the north, air in the west, and earth in the south, which follows the positions of the signs of the zodiac. So like Aries is your first sign, that's fire. Libra is opposite Aries, that's air. And then the sun is as far north as it goes in Cancer, that's water. Sun is as far south as it goes in Capricorn, which is earth. So the Golden Dawn decided, well, okay, so we're going to attribute these according to the winds model. And so the tablet of the east, they called the tablet of air. And then, but if you're going to do Golden Dawn work that is working with the zodiacal model, well, air is in the west. You pick up the tablet of air and you hang it in the west. And that is completely wrong because it is the tablet of the east primarily. It is not the tablet of air. If you were going to do that properly, I would argue that, well, you would have another version of the table that was in red that was fire, and you'd hang that one up in the east. But the letters would stay the same and the names would stay the same. The elements would just change. But that is a digression that is getting into a little bit of technical stuff. So essentially what was done with the Great Table is, so it's this layout of angels that correspond to the four directions. You have kings of the four directions. You have seniors of the four directions. They can be mapped elementally, but the direction is primary. The direction is much more important. And if you look at the diaries, there is kind of an elemental system that you could derive from it that's a little bit different than both the winds model and that, which I talk about in the books. And again, that would be a digression that I don't need to go into at this point. Just buy my books, look it up. But anyway, so what the Watchtower angels are is they're another collection of angels that have different powers. So under one of the quadrants, you've got the angels of medicine, and those are used for healing. You have the angels of transportation. They do not teleport things. I spent 2 years trying to get that to work, and apparently it does not. I've never met anybody who could. Probably the angels of transportation were actually for protecting ships on journeys and things like that, as opposed to moving things around, because they're the angels for moving things from place to place. But and so there's a whole list of these powers, and they're different from the Heptarchial powers. And the watchtowers got a lot more use than what the Heptarchia did generally in modern magic. The Heptarchia was treated as, it's kind of the side thing over here. And we're really focusing on these watchtowers because they're what's really important, according to modern magicians. And the Golden Dawn took the elemental model and put together this super complicated thing called the Concourse of Forces. And it's got all these you got truncated pyramids on each letter with colors all over the place. And people see that and they're like, oh, this is the most complicated, ridiculous system of magic ever. And it is complicated. It also is a complete afterthought. It doesn't appear in the diaries at all. It has nothing to do with the original D stuff. This is an elaboration that probably Mathers and Westcott sat down and said, well, we'll do this and make it really complicated. And, they put together the Enochian chess game, which is based on that, which again is I don't have any idea what it's supposed to do magically. I've read about it. It seems kind of silly to me. But yeah, so they wanted it to look real esoteric and mysterious, I think was the deal. That's why they added all these extra layers of cruft on top of it. But really, it's not that much different than the Tabula Bonorum. So the Tabula Bonorum is this wheel of the 49 names that's used in the Heptarchia Mystica. The Great Table is a more complicated arrangement, but it's a big grid of letters. It's each watchtower is a 12 by 13 square, I think it is. And then they're held together by the Black Cross, which the Golden Dawn took that and turned that into the Tablet of Union. That's the thing with 4 names on it that you see. It is referenced that way in the diaries. D, as far as we know, never had a separate Tablet of Union, so that's another thing that isn't really original. In the original, there's a cross. Now, there is a controversy about this, and if you read different Enochian sources, you're going to find that there's basically 2 different versions of this that people wind up using. Okay, and so the one that's probably most widely used is the earlier version that Dee received, which is more similar to how the Golden Dawn put it together. It was based on that. However, the version that I use, which is I'm probably in the minority here, is called the Tabula Recensa. And that is the final version of the table that Dee got from the spirits in 1587. Now, the controversy with this is as follows. So Dee and Kelly were trying to reconcile the different inconsistencies in their version of these names. So was it this name? No, it's this name. Which letter goes where and stuff like that. And so the story is that Kelly went down into the temple and called up the angels himself. And he said, all right, I'm going to sit here and tell me what to do to fix this. And they gave him this version, the Tabula Recensa. Now, the reason it's controversial is because some people argue, and I think this is a legitimate argument, that, Dee wasn't really present for this. Kelly kind of put it together on his own. And if the system comes from the interaction of the two, is this really right? I would argue that once Kelly brought this to Dee, And Dee did some checks on it, talked, okay, what is this? What is this? Is this really what it is? The angels seemed to confirm that it was accurate. Now, you could argue, well, Kelly was making that up. Well, maybe, but I mean, you could argue that about the whole system. You could make the argument. Some people have suggested Kelly was copying from some other source that he had that Dee didn't, and that's why. Because the amount of like overlap and consistency between the record is remarkable. I mean, it really is like Kelly was reading from something, but it's like we have never found a document that is anything like that. That it doesn't resemble anything in any other grimoire. It appears to be completely original, and no other text with this stuff has really ever been found. And so if Kelly wasn't, but then the argument goes, well, if he took it down to the temple and just copied out of it, well, but I mean, that was the material he was receiving anyway. So again, it would still be, viable, because the earlier version, if that were true, would be, well, just errors from his memory not being completely accurate. But I mean, I think that the story as it goes is the most prosaic example, the most, simplest example, most parsimonious. That's the word I'm looking for. The most parsimonious explanation is basically the story happened as written. Kelly went down, talked to the angels, and got this. And so that would make the Tabula Rassensa the final version of the Great Table. And so that is the version that I use in my own work. However, like I say, I admit that there is an argument for using the other version. I just have used this version, and I find that, experimentally it seems to work better.
Love it, Scott. That was a great answer. It either have to be that or Kelly can do some amazing amounts of Giordano Bruno-esque memorization because
Yeah.
there's this weird the most parsimonious answer is like, they talk to some other weird shit or I don't know, he's tapped into the universal consciousness, who knows. Cliff, can you add anything to the four watchtowers?
I was going to add that it's hilarious that the Golden Dawn took something that's already got a reputation for being extraordinarily complicated and added some way to make it even more complicated. But I think I have my own reasons to believe that it's impossible that this wasn't a true transmission and there sort of gets into the math and
You've written an article, haven't you, Cliff? There's a
yeah.
whole wonderful article people, it will be in the show notes. Read it. It's awesome.
Yeah, basically there are these very large numbers in the calls, and we're talking, not millions, obviously, but in the tens of thousands ish, and not just 10,000, 20,000, something that can be easily predicted. And it turns out that the number of servient angels that are associated with these zodiacal kings that I mentioned earlier, if you take them and add them up, they add up perfectly across a whole bunch of like what we would kind of consider random numbers, like 69,636 and blah 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 blah, and they add up exactly across these different servient angel numbers, and it's kind of weird. It's getting into the math a little bit. The angels I found are very mathy, basically, for lack of a better
They would
term.
be.
They would be, but yeah, it turns out that that's actually a pretty difficult problem in math. That's actually kind of difficult. We can't just like eyeball a set of like 91, very large numbers like that, and then figure out whether or not any combination of them would add up. We actually do kind of need computers for that, unless you're a human calculator. So we have Edward Kelley, who's a human calculator who can memorize all of this stuff, who's blah 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 blah. Kelly was not dumb. He was a very bright guy, but you're talking multiple superhuman abilities, that he's supposedly capable of. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. It is a crazy one, and the more you dig into it, it does get it's mind blowing. I'm just going to say it's absolutely mind blowing. We have shifted course, but I want to bring it back. So, Cliff, something that each and every person will come across besides the four tables that of course Scott's brought up, and he's like, oh, they're nice and colorful. There's red and there's yellow and ooh, it's special. There's crosses on it and stuff. And there's crosses within crosses. My goodness, is the words heirs or aethers. So can you just expand on what these are as well? In particular, why
Sure.
they're so important to Enochian magic.
Yeah, so imagine, you're an angel and you're looking down at heaven, at earth from heaven, right? And you're at the highest possible spot, closest to God. And if you're looking down, imagine that there are basically spheres, smaller and smaller spheres until you actually hit earth. from their point of view, the top one, that's the first one that they're seeing, so they call that the first aether. So it's really the lowest aether is the 30th one, but that's usually, that's closest to Earth from our point of view. To us, it looks like first, but really it's the 30th one. So, in addition to being associated with like political magic and each one of these, having their own special, location on Earth, or nation of Earth that they're associated with, they also have been, and this is one of the great innovations, from later Enochian magicians. They're also associated, in my experience, with very strong consciousness change. Um, it's difficult to speak with, because then you start getting metaphorical and more metaphorical. But what I found is that they taking the process of scrying them, basically making the call to the aethers, and then having your visionary experience. It does one little bit at a time. It's like sort of peeling off a layer of an onion each time, and then finally you kind of get to that, well, not an onion, but the Tootsie Roll center of the Tootsie Pop, to use another metaphor on top of that,
Tootsie
where it's
onions.
like,
I
okay,
haven't tried one
yeah,
of
yeah,
those. Delicious.
yeah. But you wouldn't know like what's in the very center of an onion if you like jammed, let's say, a penny down there until you finally like peeled all the different layers off. So that's kind of what I've found doing in terms of scrying the aethers, making that call, having your visionary experience. That what they do is it slowly seems to pull your consciousness apart and undo all of these nonsense narratives that we have about ourselves, about our lives, about the way reality is. And it really does shift you as you get higher and higher. You can sort of use a tree of life model, a Kabbalistic model. But basically, that eventually getting higher and higher enough, you eventually, with the top aether Lil, you actually experience or can experience a union with God. So with divine consciousness. And there's only so much you can come back down from the mountain and talk about because these start sounding weird, but you try your best. But that's a modern innovation. And I guess originally the angel said, basically like the Hekalat, texts, ancient Hebrew texts of, the thrones and the palaces, you're supposed to go up and then come down, go all the way up to the top and then slowly come down through consciousness, the way the angels do. But it sort of does build up your consciousness to be prepared for more and more expansion if you go slow stepwise that way. And that was something that Crowley did, and that really is probably one of the best innovations to come out on this system.
Conceptually, the idea is similar to like doing consciousness expansion operations, like following like the Sephiroth up on the tree of life. It's a similar kind of idea, except the aethers it's that sort of thing, but it's in like 30 distinct gradations rather than 10 like you see on the tree of life.
We've talked a little bit about what the Golden Dawn did to Enochian Magic a bit. So let's talk about the actual process itself. So what does one do exactly when they want to do Enochian Magic? So you do things a little bit differently, because I think when people get involved when trying to learn Enochian Magic, one of the first things that they're going to do is pick up a book by Lon Milo Duquette called Enochian Vision Magic. It's wonderful. I love it. But you, Scott, have said Lon takes his cues from the Golden Dawn. You wanted to take your cues from the kind of magic that was around at the time of John Dee, which was grimoire, somewhat Solomonic based magic. So I'm just going to ask both of you to go through what does one do when they want to engage in Enochian magic. So Scott, go ahead.
Okay, so the way I do it is so I start with the diary attributions, but then I add some other, modern practices in like pentagram rituals and hexagram rituals and so on that I line up by attribution with the attributions from the diaries, not the different attributions that the Golden Dawn use, and by extension that Duquette uses in his book, because he's going off Crowley's system, which comes out of the Golden Dawn. The basic process is, just like, any other modern magical operation. I use things like the lesser ritual, the pentagram, and lesser ritual, the hexagram, to open stuff. I also have completely Enochian rituals that are similar to those in my books if you want to do something that's completely Enochian and not use that. But one of the innovations that I talk about is the Golden Dawn system. They tell you use the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser banishing ritual, the hexagram to open your operations. And I changed that. So I use the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, to create this thing that I call an operate field, which I've talked about a bunch on my blog. And the idea is it creates a space where magic operates more easily. And I found that this is generally applicable like across the board to different kinds of magic. You could do that operate field thing and you can do a hoodoo thing and it'll work better. It's like a thing where it's like creating a generic space where magic is more powerful. And so I use that when I do Enochian magic. And then the process is similar to what Dee would have done. There are some prayers that you do. There is one is called the fundamental obeisance, which is used for the fundamental obeisance is used for the watchtowers and the heirs. Then the oration to God is used for the Heptarchia. But these are two prayers that Dee wrote up, aspire, oh God, aid me in this kind of thing. Dee and Kelly pretty much put the system together where you would basically just have a series of prayers. I mean, they wouldn't have ceremonial forms or anything like that. And you can do it that way. In my book, one of the things that I am the most proud of in my books on Enochian magic is I have the template that you go through of how you put all this stuff together to do the operations. People don't publish that in magic books. And it's like, oh, I've got to like keep these secrets back or something, or, I'll make some money off a class if I do this, or I don't know what the deal is, the thought behind it. Or maybe, oh, we can't really tell people how it's done. It's too dangerous or some nonsense. But no, I lay it out in my book. So I have a chapter that goes through, this is the opening. This is, this piece, this piece, this piece. And so the thing so aside from the ceremonial forms, I do use the first and second key with everything. I use the first angelic key for evocations, that's calling into the table. I use the second key for invocation, that's calling them into yourself. And then, the next 16 correspond to the quadrants of the watchtowers. And then the final 30 are for the heirs. So it depends on the kind of thing that you're doing. But so what you're going to do is you're going to do your opening. Maybe that's ceremonial. Maybe that's, some kind of prayer or something. Then you're going to do your keys for invocation, evocation. Then you're going to do your preliminary invocation, which is going to be the oration to God or the fundamental obeisance. And then essentially at that point, so then you've got like your talisman, your seal for the spirit, and it's going to go through the standard grimoire construction. You've got conjuration charge and license to depart. Dee didn't write a license to depart. He just like conjured. I have a license to depart that I've added to my books that I use, which is a little more in line with the grimoire stuff, because the conjurations Dee put together were for this single operation that spanned a couple of weeks. And the idea is you call in the spirits and I charge you to be with me, for the rest of my life kind of thing. So you actually don't really, license those spirits to depart because you're invoking them and you're kind of sealing them into yourself. Kind of like you can think of it kind of like a mini Abramelin sort of thing, but it only takes a couple of weeks as it's laid out in the diaries. But using them for practical stuff, it is helpful to have a separate license to depart. So I've added that and supplied that, sort of like a bookend to the opening prayer. But I mean, grimoire magic is at its base. You do your opening, you do your conjuration, you do your charge, you do your license to depart, you do your closing. And I mean, that is the essential structure right there. It doesn't need to be anything more complicated than that.
Love it. Thank you, Scott. Scott, when you say table, what do you mean by table?
I'm specifically talking about the holy table, which is the piece of temple furniture that sits in the middle of the temple. So it's a 3 foot by 3 foot table. It's made out of wood. It has 4 legs, and it's supposed to be made out of sweet wood, according to the diary descriptions. There are a couple interpretations of that. Jeffrey James, who published Enochian Evocation in 1983, thought that it was maybe cedar because cedar is an aromatic wood. I've also talked to someone who is up on the language usage and the Renaissance, who has told me that at the time, sweet wood referred to the wood of any tree that bears fruit. So if you're going to go to a lumber store or something, get cherry. Cherry's good. It bears fruit. Mine is actually oak, so it's wrong, but it works. I got it because I had access to the board and I just used it that way. And then it has figures painted on top of it, so it has a hexagram and then a grid of letters on it. You set these 7 talismans called the ensigns of creation. They correspond to the 7 planets. You put those around the hexagram on the thing. You cover that whole thing with a cloth, and then you put and then in the center is the Sigillum Dei Aemeth. That's like your containment structure, the true sigil of God. So that has a pentagram, that has a heptagram around it, and then again another big grid of letters. You use that to contain the stuff that you're conjuring, kind of like the Trithemian table in drawing spirits into crystals. Enochian and drawing spirits into crystals have some similarities. You have like a table of art kind of a thing, and then a crystal. And the table of art or practice in the Trithemian, it's a circle with a triangle and names around it again. And so the Sigillum Dei Aemeth is like that. So you got this table, it's got stuff drawn on it. You put the sigillum in the middle, ensigns of creation around it, cloth over it. And then if you're using a crystal, you put the crystal on the top of the sigillum. If you're using any kind of magical targeting, talisman creation, all this other stuff, it all goes on the Sigillum Dei Aemeth in the middle of that holy table. And you talked about the holy table and the great table. It can be kind of confusing. The great table is that grid of letters that works with the watchtower. The holy table is the literal piece of furniture that sits in your temple.
Amazing. Thank you, Scott, for that and for clarifying the table. Yeah, because people will get mixed up about such a thing. Cliff, how do you do the Enoki Pokey?
Well, what I do, basically, somebody was asking me and was getting frustrated about it. So I finally said, okay, look, Enochian is, for me, it's just like, 3, possibly 4 steps. 1, you activate the furniture. 2, you make the call that the desired call, and 3, you either have your vision if you're calling the aethers, and then you make your request of whatever angel you've called forward. So technically, Enochian is only 3 steps. But the problem is that, of course, there's a lot of stuff you got to do up front, right? A lot of upfront costs. So obviously, you have to make, you're going to make furniture along the way. And I actually do recommend Lon Milo Duquette's version, which is, and I believe it or not, I like whenever I'm doing Enochian, I open up my phone and I got Scott's books, I've got Aaron Leach's books, I've got Lon Milo Duquette's books, and I'm just flipping back and forth because I know kind of my own particular style. But yeah, what in terms of activating the furniture, I'll hold up the ring, or I'll look at the ring and I'll say, behold the ring, etc., the same way that the Archangel Michael said, lo, this is it, etc., etc. Then I'll hold up the lamens and say, behold the lamen. The lamen, I'll say, behold the lamen, and I have a separate one that is part of an innovation I had, so I won't get into that. But behold the lamen, as the holy table reconciles heaven and earth, blah, blah. And then I'll go around the table and say the names of each of the Enochian letters in Enochian. Give them their Enochian names. Because for whatever reason, the angels don't say that their letter B is B. They call it Pa, but it's pronounced B. So that's their prerogative, I guess. So, but yeah, I'll go ahead and do that 7 times. I'll go ahead and say the names of the angels around the Sigillum Dei Aemeth 7 times, etc. And then if there's a practical working, I'll go ahead and, this is something Scott mentions in his books. His books are great. Pick them up. Absolutely. But go ahead. I will take an angelic seal for the Heptarchia, for example, and I'll put my foot on it. Or I'll take, one of the tablets that I've made and I'll put my foot on it. And I think symbolically it's meant to say, okay, you got heaven above you, and now it's going to ground through your whole energy system down into the earth so it can actually have that practical effect. But yeah, that's about it. I'll make the call. I will, if I have, I've made my own copy of Liber Loga in the angelic letters, so I may, I'll probably put my hand on that. I do try to get some of that tactile hand on as many of the pieces of furniture as I can. I've just found it tends to like get that the juice, the energy flowing through you. Much better, and it makes it more. It's more fun, Get to go back to preschool, show and tell, to pet the bunny, that sort of thing. But also, it seems to work better, and that's sort of what the angels have said is like, you try to get as much of this incorporated as you can. So, I know just from personal experience, I can't, it's hard to describe, but it's like you feel energy behaving way more cleanly almost if you are like getting yourself integrated well with the table. But like Scott says, I do put a cloth over top of the table again, just because that's what I was told to do, so I'll go ahead and do that. But for people who are trying to do it themselves, obviously pick up any of the books, that I mentioned, but also what I've done to try to like really, really severely lower the cost to entry to this system is I've made this Excel spreadsheet that has all, as far as I know, all of the tools that you will need. So you can just print off and get like a paper copy in color if need be or whatever of the tools, so that way, okay, you want a paper copy of the ring, well, I've got that for you, and I've made it the background gold, gold colored, so you can print that off, tape it up, whatever the case may be, and just sort of get your feet wet that way, and try to get into it that way. So you will need to download an Enochian font and a flipped Enochian font, but gee, computers are so hard, just find somebody to help you if you don't know how.
Oh man, yeah. There's some things that we haven't covered, but have been covered in my John D episode, the Sigillum Dei Aemeth. It's the symbol that everybody knows. Besides the pentagram, it's like the most ubiquitous magical symbol of all time. Everybody, if you were even interested in this for like 6 months, you've already seen this. Trust me. Go to my John D episode, everybody. You'll know what they're talking about. But it is part of the whole temple table setup, everybody, and it's important. And if you live in London, you can literally go to the British Museum and see several of them. There's 3 of them, I think, or correct me if I'm wrong. They're in the British Library. The British Museum. They're right there. They're made out of wax. They're really fun. They're really cool. But here's a personal question, Cliff. I want to keep you on the line here. What this this magic is it's so idiosyncratic. Yeah, it comes from this grimoire tradition, but it is so patently D. It's got cryptography in there, navigation,
Yep.
directions, like it. So
Mhm.
why did this magic fascinate you? What was the appeal?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, it had the background when I was first studying magic, 19 years old and at Magus Books in Minneapolis, and had read about it, but I couldn't find enough to actually work with it. But it did have that, ooh, this is scary and it's very, very powerful, and it is. Don't get me wrong, and but the reason why I like it is sort of a couple of reasons. One, you can really do a whole host of things. We talk about angels of medicine, angels of transportation, angels of transformation, yeah, and so on and so forth. Well, I think all of us, would like to have angels at hand if somebody, we love gets sick. And, I can't think of anything that's happened in the last 4 years that, that might have caused a lot of people to get sick, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, and actually, yeah, after that happened, I actually, and relatives were getting sick from it. I actually called on them, and they have yet to, as far as I know, get the big C word again. Which is not to say that that they're gonna, you should take risks. There's sort of like that phrase in the Bible: "Do not put the Lord thy God to the test." I think that's one of the
Mm.
commandments. But at any rate, it does have some effect, and it is there's one story where I was sort of just doing a beta run or a test run of the Angels of Gold and Precious Stones. And that ought to perk up everybody's ears, right? Like, what? So,
Treasure. I love treasure.
treasure, right? And that's definitely not something John Dee and Edward Kelley ever got too caught up in,
Never.
right? But
No.
what I found was so I did that, and I was just asking people online, hey, I'd like to try this. Is there anything you would want? Here's a list of powers, blah, blah, blah. And somebody asked me for it. So I called on the angels for that, and for them, and I had no idea what was going to happen. And the gentleman got back to me, and he said, okay, so I didn't get gold and precious stones, but what I found was a $2 desk at a garage sale that is actually worth thousands of dollars. And so I said, okay, now I can talk to you astrologically about why that's a little harder for me, Saturn in the second house if you're an astrologer, but that's okay. I mean, the main thing is like you get certain things that do come up and that do improve your situation. And yeah, so it's the variety of things that you can ask for, and it's also the consciousness expansion, that sort of thing, that it really does put you in a more angelic, divine mental space. Now, obviously, you kind of want to like keep recharging it so you don't, fall into hubris, whatever the case may be. But that's sort of been my experience, is that it sort of grows you up, for lack of a better word. It matures you.
I love it. Great answer. Scott, you've been doing this for 30 years. Why stick with Enochian Magic, sir?
Well, I stick with it because it's powerful and it's effective. I mean, if I need something done, this is the system I whip out to do it. So I did this Enochian masterclass with Jason Newcomb and Aaron Leach. And Aaron had this comment that, well, Scott, you do this practical stuff. That's like using a jackhammer to drive in a single nail. And I'm like, the nail gets driven in really well. It's like, why do you not want to use the most powerful thing available to do what you're doing? I mean, I don't believe in like half-assing stuff. I originally got interested in it when I was in college, just studying Hermeticism and reading about Dee and Kelly, and they came up with this like unique system of magic. And so I got into like practicing it, like 1990, 1991, something like that. And, I started off with like the Schuler books. Remember the Schuler books? And then I also got a hold of a copy of Jeffrey James, which is from 1983. And so at the time, the Schuler books were like the books you could get on the Golden Dawn Enochian system. And Jeffrey James was the book you could basically get on kind of more like what the D diary system was. And I found pretty quickly, wow, this Golden Dawn stuff, this is really complicated. This diary stuff, this basically just works. So I kind of went with that and started building off of that. And so the way that I do the system is it's much more inspired by the diaries themselves, as opposed to all the attributions that the Golden Dawn had that really were just kind of confusing, I thought, when I was younger. And now, but with the caveat, there are people who use that system and claim to get really good results with it. So I'm not trying to like poo-poo it for people that it works for. My first rule is if it works, it works. But for me, I found that going with the diary structure is better, and the magic is more effective. Also, I mean, I work in IT, so it's like, some of the kind of computational stuff that sort of appeals to me as well. The deriving things from charts and tables and, those sorts of things. But, primarily I've stuck with it because it's very effective. I've done experimental practical stuff with Enochian, and it really works.
Fantastic, Scott. So we've done a lot of talking about angels. I've even told a couple of jokes about angels that were great. If I don't mind, no, I'm just joking. They were terrible. They're awful. But everybody wants to know, particularly because I put this up on my Patreon account. I'm like, I'm going to be talking about Enochian Magic. 75% of the questions there were not about like how to do it. It was about the things that you contact. So these entities, whatever they are, that one can contact through Enochian Magic, what's their deal? How are they different than, say, spirits from grimoires like the Ars Goetia or the Heptamrin? What's the difference? How do these hit differently to you two?
Well, if it's okay, I'll go first. Scott's got a lot more experience than I do, but what I would say about Enochian angels is that I was asked by Ryan Villa and his Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast, and he was asking, are these seem like more hyper intelligent kind of beings that are really trying to plug you in to something? And that word hyper intelligent really sticks out in my mind. Of all the people that the angels could have contacted to do the download, John Dee and Edward Kelley were probably the best partners that they could have at the time. John Dee was extraordinarily smart, extraordinarily well read for his time. He was a famous alchemist, and he also trained Edward Kelley up into being an alchemist in his towards the end of his life. But what I've found is there's They're very good with just giving you good symbolism, good imagery, trying to get you to speak to you almost like more on a collective unconscious level. But you're able to do it in vision, so you're not, you're awake doing it. You don't have to be asleep. And that's kind of my now contrasting this with let's say another angelic system, like let's say the Shemham Farash angels. They also have a wide array of powers, and they're also really good, but it seems much more, it feels a lot more one way, like you are asking them to do something, but there's not as much of a dialogue or a communication. And the other thing too is I found that if you want to ask them something, they will sometimes slip in something and you have no idea what it means. So that whole idea about the numbers that I mentioned earlier, that was a communication from them. Hey, you ought to really check this out. And so that was like, I said, okay, let me try this. And, thanks to Wikipedia and other stuff and, good computer programmers of the past who have like made it possible to run these things, I was able to actually get a full, section of a paper done, but it's not something I would have looked at,
Right.
but I find that they continue to try to say, hey, check this out, check this out. One time I was in the Aether of Lil, and I was asked to find I think it was a 5-cell, which is like a 4-dimensional tetrahedron like thing. And they said, find the ratio of the hyper volume of an inscribed hypersphere within that versus a circumscribed one. And the ratio is 256 to 1. I don't know what it means, but hey, I'm now spreading the good news.
Yep.
Do you find, Scott, that this is what they hit like? You've used the Heptameron, have you not? You've interacted with Ars Goetia list spirits. What's the difference between these fellows? Let's call them all fellows.
All right. So first of all, if you're comparing it with something like the Ars Goetia, which is primarily a collection of chthonic spirits, so like underworld spirits, the Enochian system tends to be much more celestial. So it's like, or you could talk about like the aerial spirits from the Key of Solomon. You do have the cacodemons, which are kind of the one kind of chthonic element to the system. Maybe kind of like a balancing, grounding kind of a thing. But primarily you're dealing with celestial spirits as opposed to chthonic or underworld spirits. And their powers are a little bit different. There's some characteristics that are different. For example, in The Secrets of Solomon, which is a recent Joe Peterson text. Leaping Laughter, Joseph Peterson, who does a bunch of these books, lives like 2 hours from Minneapolis. So it's like, he'll come and like talk at Leaping Laughter and stuff like that. So that's cool. But he pointed out that in The Secrets of Solomon, there's this interesting point where it's talking about both chthonic and celestial spirits. And it says that the difference is that celestial spirits usually won't visibly appear. And that's kind of been my experience too with scrying and stuff. It's more like you get more like a sense that they're present as opposed to, a lot of like visual kind of effects. But the advantage of them is they could be put into a ring and carried around with you. And what do we find in Enochian? We find a ring. So that's kind of an interesting point with the aerial celestial overlap there. And The Secrets of Solomon is from the 1500s, is where that text originates. So it comes right out of that period. So in that sense, they're a little bit different than like the chthonic, like demon grimoire spirits, because Christianity has this real oversimplification of the spirit world. Like celestial stuff is angels and they're good. Chthonic stuff is demons and they're evil. And it's like, it really doesn't work that way. Celestial and chthonic spirits, they approach the way they use their powers in some kind of different ways. Like that distinction with, appearing versus, working like with a ring kind of idea. But you could certainly find celestials that are hostile and chthonics that are friendly. I mean, those exist in the world. I would say maybe the chthonics overall tend to be a little more hostile, but at the same time, I don't do like the spirit torture, curse of the chain thing, all that nonsense when I'm working with chthonic spirits, because they return the treatment they receive. It's like, everybody I've heard of, or I got messed up by this goetic operation. I'm like, well, did you invoke the curse of the chain on them? Well, yeah. It's like, you dumbass. It's like, of course they're going to be pissed off at you if you're standing here in your circle like cursing them because they're not working fast enough for you or something. I mean, who likes that, right? But so I would say that generally speaking, like the energy is of like the Heptarchial kings, watchtower kings, and the zodiacal kings, and the aethers. Their energy is actually fairly similar to that of like the Kabbalistic archangels. There's a fairly close overlap to how that feels in terms of working with them. They seem to be within their area of expertise. They almost seem to be kind of like more souped up versions of those energies. And so, I mean, I guess that's kind of been my experience. The cacodemon, one of the things about, so the cacodemons in the Enochian system, most people don't talk about them. I've conjured them a few times for various things. And the cacodemons, the thing about them is they're very, very powerful and very, very dumb. You have to give them exact instructions. And, like if they run into like a magical defense they can't overcome, they will literally just sit and bang their head against it until, the term of the spell runs out. But there's a lot of power. So, it's like eventually they can wear something down and they can be very effective. But with the more intelligent entities like the kings and princes and so on, they're smart and they're strategic and they can figure out how to work around situations and do things. They also have a much better sense of like the spirit of what you're asking instead of just the letter of it. Whereas if the cacodemons are like, monkey's paw waiting to happen if you aren't careful.
I love the monkey's paw metaphor. Awesome. So most folks who have taken even a cursory look at Enochian magic will come across many statements to this effect. Enochian magic is the most powerful and dangerous ritual magic ever devised in the West, and unless you are properly prepared, you will go mad or you will cause natural disasters. You could even go bald. So, what do you make of these kind of cautionary statements? And I'm going to add another question onto this. Do you guys have any crazy stories of anything that's happened? But so, yeah, let's do this. Let's tackle this in two parts. And Cliff, I'm going to throw this one to you. So, is it this powerful? Is this the scary stuff? Like, should people be like, do you need to have 15 a black belt in masonry? I don't know. Do you need to have all of the things to be able to protect yourself from it? And do you have any crazy stories, Cliff?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that Jason Louv, he sort of models this is he says the reason for the furniture is to sort of insulate this very strong electric current, right? And so you wouldn't put your finger in the socket. And to me, that's sort of been my experience when I was working in 2014 with the system. I didn't do as much of the furniture like the angels had asked people to do. So, it's sort of like what is that line from South Park? You're going to have a bad time. So, you kind of got to recognize that this is sort of a little bit above and beyond their asking. And, if you're putting in effort into anything, it's sort of like high investment, high reward. That's kind of what Enochian is, right? So I would say that, yeah, for something simple like doing a call to the aether of text, you probably don't need all the furniture because it's a relatively gentle energy compared to, let's say, doing the call to Lil, or even worse ones, stronger ones. So that's been my not worse but stronger. So yeah, I would say that's been my experience. When I've made the furniture. I get what I just sort of loosely call an angel high. So it's sort of like they're doing this sort of confirmation that yes, this is a good thing for you to do, and we're going to give you this reward of you getting a pleasant feeling. And it's funny that always happens the instant that not when I've put the beeswax in the pie tin to make the Sigillum Dei Aemeth, let's say, but as soon as it starts melting is when I feel it. So they're definitely doing it at different stages. But so I would say that be as careful and ethical as you would be with Enochian magic as you would with anything else. And, generally speaking, think through what it is that you actually want. So getting again to that whole, going back to Crowley once again, that whole idea of a true will. What is it you really, really want? And why do you want it? If you can't answer that, then maybe think about it for a bit. So that's what I would say. I would say make the furniture, or do those stand-ins. Now, the craziest story is that I may or may not have engaged in some political magic of my own, and a certain candidate for office's skyscraper may have lost power, or maybe, let's put it this way, maybe a certain tower may have lost power suddenly within a week, because I did not quite word it as well as I would have liked to. And even though I was working, I tried to be specific. I think the angels were actually giving me a little,
Oh,
maybe
you
not,
said you
maybe
wanted
don't
him to
stick
lose his power. Is that
to
what you
lose
said?
power, and suddenly he lost power. And it's like, okay, I'm a maroon.
Yes.
I love it.
So at any rate, that was sort of like one of those, who would have
Yeah.
thought? But oh well,
Mhm.
Scott,
Scott knows exactly who I'm talking about.
Scott, is this the most terrifying magic ever devised in the history of the world? And do you have any crazy stories, sir?
It's not terrifying. It's just powerful. It's going back to the monkey's paw thing. Okay, when you do a number one, don't do Enochian expecting that it's not going to work, because it's going to do something. That's number one. Number two, be very clear about what you want, because it's the monkey's paw thing. It's going to take the channel of least probabilistic resistance to make something happen. And if there's something that, well, it could happen this other way that you didn't think about, that is probabilistically easier, that's what it's going to do. This idea that Enochian drives people insane is nonsense. I have dug into it, and I think it is absolute crap. I don't think it's true at all. I did a survey of people on my blog about this. Like, one person said, yes, it's true, and there's one person I know. But I have a degree in psychology. You need to understand that a quarter of the population is mentally ill. 1 in 4 people. So if you were going to show that Enochian drives people mad, you would have to show that the incidence of mental illness is higher than that among people who do Enochian magic. And the data is just not there. I think that it comes from this one particular event. Paul Foster Case, who founded the Builders of the Adytum, had a friend who did Enochian magic and had some kind of a mental breakdown. And he's writing regarding, we have to remove this evil Enochian from this and this, because this guy was a good friend of his and had a mental breakdown. But it's like, there's no evidence that Enochian had anything to do with it. It's like he got into Enochian and he had this mental breakdown. It's like, correlation is not causality. And I've never seen any evidence that the angels like drive people insane or anything like that. It's not that it's, some kind of terrifying, scary thing. I'm going to rip on Donald Tyson a little bit. Aleister Crowley did not start World War I and World War II by opening the aethers, which he claims. Donald Tyson says that is, he partially cracked open the aethers and that created the world wars. Come on, man. Tyson is, I'm sorry, I spend a significant amount of time.
As a fellow Canadian, I apologize on his behalf.
In mastering the 30 years. But anyway, so this idea, it's going to end the world. And I have to say this. I point this out every time. It's repetitive. People hear me at interviews, but Donald Tyson comes out. He says, well, in Tetragrammaton, this theory that the Enochian magic, could end the world. And what's the next book he publishes? Enochian Magic for Beginners.
For beginners.
It's like, if you think it's going to end the world, it's going to end the world, and now I'm going to teach you how to do it. It's like, come on. That's right. He's obviously being spooky and edgy, and I don't think he actually even believes that. I think it's this kind of straw man thing. And then he goes on into like the Necronomicon gnosis after that, which is like, come on, man. But anyway, so I think that the main danger of it is the amount of power you're working with. And this is a system where, okay, if you word something the wrong way, it's like, yeah, your candidate's not going to get out of office. The power in their building is going to go out, stuff like that. But it can be really effective for a lot of stuff. I did think that was an interesting example that you talked about with the Angels of Precious Stones, where you found this desk that was worth something, because there's a distinction in the diaries between the Angels of Precious Stones and the Cacodemons of Precious Stones. And the distinction is that the Angels of metals and precious stones, will find like ore veins and stuff. So they find you the stuff that's worth something. Whereas the cacodemons, it says they will actually bring you the money coined. So they're supposed to bring you money. So kind of a crazy story. You can conjure the cacodemons to make your stocks go up. This is actually a thing. You got stock investments. Yep, that's making money. It's like, and it's like, so I bought Apple stock back in 1997, and I have been casting spells on it for the last 20 years to make it go up. And if you look at the value of Apple stock, it is basically the best stock in the world. I think a good case can be made that that's working. So I guess what I will say here, and somewhat jokingly, but I will say it, is that all the people who have made billions of dollars on Apple stock, with it being the best stock in the world, I'll say you're welcome.
Yeah, I would just want to just chime in. The main thing I would say, I mean, the caution against Enochian magic is there because, and it's the same caution that anybody should have if they're getting into magic. Be relatively stable, because otherwise you're working with something that's going to alter your consciousness. And if you're not stable, then why are you doing that? Instead, work from a good solid foundation. That's why the tree of life, you start with the foundation, right? You go from the world of action and you go up to Yesod. So that's sort of the main thing, right? Don't lose sight of that. And also, this is something that Lon mentions in his book. Take a break. If you're hitting a wall, don't try to like keep going. You're gonna have a bad time. It's sort of like, if you're skiing, you don't go down the harder mountain if you're falling on the bunny hills, so, or the bunny slopes. So that's sort of my main point, is that it's like the same Enochian, or the same lesson you learn from any other form of magic, except times 10, times 100. And it's not something I do every day. And I try to use it strategically and, mainly for a consciousness focus. But you don't want, I'll give you a good example. Like, there's this is not my innovation. A lot of people have done this, where you can substitute a word in the call to the aethers. And when I've done that, I've used my own name, right? So, oh, you heavens which dwell within me. And that was a very trippy psychedelic thing, because you are literally looking at yourself, except from this very energetic, powerful perspective. So I do recommend that if you want to have an interesting time with that. But on the other hand, if you are somebody who has a lot of self-hatred, who has a lot of nonsense views about yourself, then why would you ever do that? Work on that first, then maybe see the heavens. Because even if you got the best version of yourself, or the most heavenly celestial version of yourself, that's still going to be such a delta with the way you actually look at yourself, that's going to be a bad experience. So it's just the general rule of being a conscientious, mature adult.
One other thing that you need to pay attention to is the Enochian angels, generally speaking, once you're working with them, they like people who work with them a lot. So they're going to spend all this time, a lot of time, telling you how awesome you are. And, somebody goes, I conjured the Enochian angels, and they told me that I was like the great prophet who would usher in the new era of the blah, blah, blah. The proper response is, yeah, they tell everybody that. So keep that in mind.
As far as the danger is concerned, and I'm speaking to everybody listening here, and I've said it before, and I've probably said it to you, the listener, if you sent me this email. Life is inherently dangerous. I hate to say it. You take a risk stepping into a vehicle. You take a risk crossing the street. You take risks every day. Magic is no different, right? None of us are safe. And that's what's fun about life. I hate to say it. And I'm not trying to like make it sound like just go out and do stupid shit. No, just be aware that when you're doing this kind of stuff, yeah, there is going to be some danger, and it's part of the package, and enjoy it, lean into it. So I'm going to get on my high horse for a sec here, gentlemen. Bear with me. I don't do Enochian magic. I dabbled very briefly, and I'm not going to mention the book that I was using, but it wasn't very good. And it just, my perspective now has always been one where it seems so of John Dee it's kind of one of those things where I want to leave it with him. Like and I hope this doesn't sound like I'm being righteous, but I respect Dee so much that it's like this kind of seemed like it belongs to him. Yes, he was the conduit via how this system came to us, but it seemed like the situation between him and Kelly was so idiosyncratic and so personalized between those two personalities that part of me is just like, I will look at it like a museum piece and it's there, it's behind the ropes, and I'm okay with that. So I'm going to put it to you, and I'll ask you this, Scott. What do you think Dee would have thought about folks using his magic system that he received?
Well, I think that he went back and forth on it. And if you look at the diaries, you see periods where, oh, this is fantastic, and this is going to be, like the age to come, and this kind of stuff. But then, oh wait, this is dangerous, and it's problematic for these reasons or whatnot. So I get the feeling that throughout the course of his working with Kelly, his opinion kind of went back and forth on this. I do think that a lot of that was influenced by Dee was very Christian, and he was always worried about doing something that might offend God or be sinful and stuff like that. And so, in that regard, he probably would look at, for example, something like Aleister Crowley using it in a Thelemic context. He probably would be like, what the fuck, right? But I think that, the system does work. It's a piece of technology. Magic should be a progressive science. The technology should be the technology. If you take a microprocessor and put it in this kind of a device and it works, it's like, well, what does the guy who invented that microprocessor have to say about it? Unless you want, design notes or something like that. I think magic needs to be that way. It needs to move beyond personalities. It needs to move beyond orders. It needs to move beyond organizations. And what we need is a progressive technology modeled on the physical sciences to the degree that we can do that. And if that's the case, it means that, well, the people who developed it, really, it's largely irrelevant. It's like you test the technology. And when you test the technology, you know if it works or not. And we need to share this. So we've got peer review and stuff in the magical community. And we could catch up to the physical sciences. It's just secrecy hampers us, and cults of personality hamper us, and obsessions with, how this came about instead of what it is. The Enochian history is interesting, sure. But what I care about is its tech that works. And that's my take on it. So, I approach it more like a scientist. And I think that that is the approach that people should take. Science is the best way we have of apprehending the world, understanding how it works, and we should apply that to the paranormal in as best a way as we can. I think if we finally get to a point where we have an instrument for measuring consciousness, that's the big piece that we don't have. We can't say, oh, your consciousness is, 47, 47 Stenwicks. Okay, let's say that was the unit. It probably is not. But let's say it was something like that. If you had that, you could just map, oh, here's the state, and then it maps to this. Here's the probability shift from the operation. You'd be able to just measure everything and lay this out, do statistical analysis. You'd have the whole thing solved. We would know exactly how it works. Because that is a variable that we don't have that kind of a handle on, we have to go at it in kind of a proto-scientific way. But we should be as scientific as we possibly can. And we should work to eliminate factors that really aren't important to the technology and getting the results, whether we're talking about magical results or mystical results. That's my take on it.
Very great answer, Scott. I love that. I want people to go back and re-listen to that because, that's a very interesting angle to take as well. Dee was indeed what we would probably call a proto-scientist, and like it's in a way using his system it leans into that. So I hear that as well. Cliff, what do you think? What do you think, Dee? Would he smirk? Would he shake his fist? What do you think, Dee's?
Yeah, he probably would, like Scott said, he would probably be horrified by its incorporation into Thelemic traditions. He'd be horrified by people by a kind of mercenary way. And look, it's just times change, people change, and yet, my experience with the angels is they have adapted themselves rather nicely to my model, which tells me that the angels are very adaptive. And so I think that John Dee probably would be impressed by his long-lasting influence. That this is that A, the system is used, and B, that outside of the system he still has had, like you mentioned, Douglas, a proto-scientific people who were his intellectual descendants basically created the scientific revolution. So I think he would be happy with that part and a lot of his humanism coming through. But yeah, he would find it odd that an Anton LaVey took it in a satanic direction. He would be horrified by that. He would be very confused by a more modern person like, let's say, Daniel Rection, who takes it into an intergalactic thing. We have to keep in mind that a lot of even like the language that Dee was using was relatively new on this whole idea of not an angel or a spirit, but just an entity. Like that's a relatively recent word, and it had only been around 100 years, so it hadn't gotten into this whole idea of, well, let's use a neutral term. We're not going to assume that it's a spirit. We're not going to assume it's an angel. We're just going to give it this neutral term, entity, as in some kind of being. But we don't know what else. He would be confused by that. He's like, no, use the model, But people don't talk angels as much anymore. Some do, but
They're in that really shitty section of the bookstore. I'm just gonna say, like the
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Here's what's interesting to me, though, guys, and this might just be me. What I'm most fascinated about with Dee is not the system he received, but how he got there. I think that his influences, things like Juratus, Honore, the Almadel, the things that he had in his library, that to me is interesting. And that to me is more inspiring than I think that what he received. The tools he used to get to the tools that we now have, to me, is probably the more influential and interesting aspect of John Dee. And as those are starting to be published more and more now, I that's where I'm kind of like, that's where I think the real genius of Dee that people should be looking at. And this is again coming from somebody, again, very cursory. I played with Enochian Magic like the US played with the metric system. Like I very short and like is like nah, and then I moved on kind of stuff. So I can't really say, and I'm talking about things perhaps I don't know about, but I like to look at the things that Dee was influenced by. So that's where I'll leave that. I've got one final question here for the both of you before we talk about what you guys are going to get up to and where to find your work. A few folks would probably have listened to this episode and been like, cool, sign me up. I want to do this kind of magic. So what would both of you recommend for people that are interested in dipping their toes into this? And is there a way of doing this magic that is not as self-involved? But what's the best thing that both of you would recommend from your experiences, please? Scott, we'll start with you.
I would recommend picking up Mastering the Mystical Heptarchy and working out of it. It's a short book. It's a relatively inexpensive book. It covers like the basics of like the furniture and stuff like that. It covers the process. It covers the template of how stuff is put together, and you got 16 total spirits to work with as opposed to hundreds. It's definitely a simpler way of working with it, and also something that is going to be very familiar to people who have a background with other kinds of planetary magic. People who have worked with the Arbitel or the Heptameron grimoires like that. And I will say too that your point is well taken about Dee's process of putting this stuff together. That proto-scientific process of taking all these sources together and deriving something new out of it. Really, that process is a lot more important, I think, going forward than the static content of the material itself, because really it's the approach that is in some ways the most innovative about it. So I would agree with you to that extent regarding the things that all came together to form the Enochian system. But as a bit of an aside, I wrote Mastering the Mystical Heptarchy for somebody to be able to pick it up and work out of it. You could just flip back and forth the pages and read all the different sections in order. I specifically wrote it so it could be my temple book working with this magic, because nobody had that anywhere. And so That really would be my best recommendation is, buy this $12.95 book on Amazon that I wrote, work through that. And once you've got kind of a familiarity with how that works, you can go on to looking at the Great Table where you have a lot more spirits, but essentially you have the methodology is originally laid out in the Heptarchia that you can follow. So you'll have some familiarity with the system when you move on to the more complex components.
Can I just quickly, before you answer this, Cliff, would both of you recommend Lon's book, Enochian Magic, even just as a read?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah,
it's a good book if you want to learn what like the Crowley Golden Dawn system is, and Lon also does some kind of stuff where he brings in some stuff from the diaries and that, which I think generally speaking work well. I mean, I would say probably if you want to learn that system of Enochian, it's probably the best book out there for it.
Cliff, you think that you give a thumbs up to Lon's book?
Yeah, absolutely, and all of Scott's books also. They're really good, and he's elaborated a lot with different rituals. I also have taken the master class that he was one of the instructors for, and that's still available as far as I know. So I can highly recommend that. You get 3 really good teachers, each of whom is giving you kind of a nice little lecture on stuff and sort of getting you eased into the systems, trying to wrap your head around what otherwise is like really complicated, but slowly just sort of helping you understand the system a little bit better. I recommend, if you want more of the history, or at least to try to understand where Dee is coming from, I can definitely recommend Deborah Harkness's book, John Dee's something,
Conversation with the Angels.
Conversation with the Angels. Thank you. That was the one thing I didn't make a note about. She's really good. She also has turned over to writing fiction, and was wildly successful that way. So maybe the Angels were giving her a big thumbs up. But anyway, so I recommend that book to learn some of the history. And if you want sort of that blend between history and magic, you can get Jason Louve's book, John Dee and the Empire of Angels. But for the most part, if you want to get your feet wet in the system itself and don't want necessarily to know all that, yeah, I would say Lon's books, Scott's books, Aaron Leach's books. Those are like the three people who I really just constantly go back over and read their stuff. And Scott's is and by far of those 3, Scott's is the most accessible in terms of just getting your feet wet. I've had a harder time with the other 2, which is not to say anything about them. Maybe just my style doesn't mesh. Not here to make any enemies here, but that's just Scott's especially has been very, very approachable.
Fantastic. Guys, this has been wonderful, and wow, we're nearly approaching 2 hours of stuff here. We have merely scratched the surface, and it gets very, very complex. But what Cliff just mentioned is true, and I'm sure Scott would agree with this. Once you just start to kind of chip away and start to get familiar with the terminology, that's maybe one of the hardest parts. The terminology, it's not, you don't need an abacus and like and an invisible ink code book from a gas station store. Like this stuff, you just have to stick with it and start to learn all of the things. And from my take, and again, this is not my variety of magic for the most part. I like the more list spirit grimoire, other kind of stuff. But this magic itself is one that requires you to meet it on its own terms. I would certainly, definitely, and this is all I will say from my end, learn about Dee's story, his history, not just the stuff that happened while he was with Kelly, what happened afterwards, the fact that he had other scryers. Remember, he was constantly, the better part of his life was spent trying to contact angels and entities. And while he was kicked down a peg during the Enlightenment, they tried to make him into a fool. The fact that we still have it now and we are engaging with his magic, and the fact that we find him such a compelling character, is testament to how great John Dee is. And I think his magic certainly deserves a look from everybody. So that's my final word on it. I got to ask Scott, where can people find your stuff online? What is going on with the blog? And do you have any more books coming out? And will you actually produce a Enochian Universe book, or is that just gonna be some more books? The people need to know. Tell us where they can find all of your things and all of the stuff.
Okay, so first of all, my author website is scottstenwick.com. You can go there and find links to buy all the different books. I have pages for the different books with a whole bunch of different ordering options. So, if you don't want to just order it off Amazon because, you don't like Jeff Bezos, there's other stuff you could do. And so the Enochian Universe book is essentially done. I mean, essentially the material that was going to go into it has been put into the 3 books that I published. And so, I mean, effectively, mastering Enochian Magic is effectively the Enochian Universe, just in 3 parts. So, as far as that trilogy, I basically am considering it complete at this point. I have looked at possibly the idea of doing at some point in the future, like an experimental Enochian kind of book, talking more about some of the operations that I've done, some of the ideas I've had, and things like that. Currently, though, I'm working more on a Thelemic Magic book that is going to be pretty extensive. So I don't know how long that's going to take me to write. It may very well be a while. But you can also find the Algoides blog. That's ananael.blogspot.com. I have an Enochian forum on that you can go into and ask Enochian questions if you want. I have links also on the blog to the site that's maintaining like where the scans from the British Museum are, so you can navigate through that and go through and actually, this page, just look that up. It's like, man, when I was putting together Mastering the 30 Years, that was so helpful. Because, back in the 90s, it's like you could, just scan it on the page. Okay, what does that letter look like? You could just do that. Whereas, in the 90s, when I was going to do Enochian Universe, I would have had to like fly to Britain and like sat there paging through stuff at the British Museum. But don't have to do that anymore. So that helped a lot. But yeah, on the blog, I mean, I post various articles, some Enochian articles, some Thelemic Magic stuff. And as I said, that's ananael.blogspot.com is the URL for that. You can also just put Scott Stenwick into Google, like everything will come up too. So on the blog, I do make a point of trying to answer questions if people have them, so they can certainly go to the blog, ask a question, and generally speaking, they'll get a response. So
Amazing. Thank you so much. And the 3 books, people, Mastering the Mystical Heptarchy, Mastering the Great Table, and Mastering the 30 Heirs. Grab those. But Mastering the Mystical Heptarchy comes highly recommended. Cliff, tell us what's going on in your world. Tell us about Enochian today. Tell us what's happening next. Give us all of the details, sir.
Sure. I mean, I will just do something, some kind of operation. I'll post the results on the blog. And so if people want to look at, my recreated attempt at Jebafall, they can do that. That was intense, I got to say. But yeah, Enochian.today, just for a whole bunch of things. I try not to, I try to just keep it straightforward as far as what is going on. But at times, I guess it probably is a little personal. So I do try to avoid that big inflated ego that you could get if you take your own stuff too seriously. But really, this is something that most people. It's not for everybody. Enochian's not for everybody. But go there if you want to, take a look and just have a cursory interest or whatever. In terms of actually working the system, maybe trying to extend the system in parts. That's something else that I try to do.
You had a
So, for
you had a
example,
mandala as well. You just released an Enochian
yeah,
mandala. You have videos too,
yeah.
which are incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I have videos on YouTube. If you just search Enochian.today, all one word, it should come up. And so I kind of go over each of the like different tools and stuff like that. So I try, like I said, I'm trying to lower the barrier to entry because it's scary, but if you just want to have stuff to, look at, learn, chip away at, that's sort of a way to go about it. Um, I also have another separate site called yourlightbridge.com where I can offer some astrological consultations. And so the more I learn about astrology, the more I appreciate Enochian and vice versa, because it really does link up very well. But yeah, and I would say like those are like my 2 main efforts, and I haven't. As far as the next one, I've gotten my first video request, and they want me to go over the alphabet, and it's like, okay, I can go over the alphabet. However, it's got that different pronunciation, and it varies between Aaron and Scott, and and chances are I don't pronounce it very well either, but that's okay, But so that'll probably be the next thing that comes up. But yeah, as far as the mandala goes, it's kind of this interesting download that I'm getting from the angels, and it's literally just supposed to be point of focus to gaze or meditate at, and that what I've been told is that it's supposed to give that simple consciousness change so that you really don't need to do anything except sit and stare. That's what I've been told. I don't know, and I'm just gonna keep working at it, and who knows. But yeah, I've got the tables right now. They're a lot like Liber Loga, so like big grids of letters, and right now I'm at about there's the one I'm working on is 65 rows by 67 columns, and then we're getting into the hundreds for the next one. So, but I've been told that there will only be so many. It will not keep going forever because, the angels acknowledge that I have a life. So.
Cliff also wrote, and it will be in the show notes, everybody, an overview of the mathematics and astrology of the Enochian system. Please read it. Cliff, chances of a book in the future, yay or nay?
I thought I was thinking about writing one. I even posted one, maybe a little prematurely, that I'll write one, but for whatever reason, it wasn't quite gelling the way I wanted it. So I'm taking a step back, just going to continue doing what I'm going to do, and I'll probably look at doing it whenever the mandala is done. and also possibly another table, so a physical table with which to work Enochians. So we'll see.
Amazing. I will have links to everything, as well as where to find on Twitter, as well as Blogspot, everybody, both Scott and Cliff. So please go to the show notes. And those show notes are, as always, available at whatmagicisthis.com. So there you can also find links to my Twitter account, my Instagram account, as well as my Facebook account. I spend quite a bit of time on Twitter, just posting weird things. The other two, I'm on there, kind of, not a lot. But if you want to reach out to me, those places, by all means, go for it. I will probably get back to it at some point, but it might not be as quick as people are used to these days. I don't move at the speed of the 21st century. I will just say that. So do you enjoy what I'm doing here at What Magic Is This? And you'd love to see more of this podcast? Well, there's 3 ways of supporting my show, and I'd like to take you through all 3 of them. I do it each and every show, but guess what? This one's no different. Here we go. The first way is, of course, the best way of supporting my show, and that is through Patreon. Patreon.com/whatmagicisthis. $7 a month. I do so much stuff there. I'm kind of tired of telling everybody like all of the things that I have on there, but I have so much stuff. It's true. It is basically a whole different program. You are getting a different What Magic Is This, and it's a bit more personalized, a bit more idiosyncratic. You get to see the other D, which is D for Douglas. I'm in no way comparable to John Dee. John Dee was insane. He was a wizard. I'm just a strange, dirty magician. Anyhow, this show that I do on the Patreon, it's got so much stuff. I do videos. I just released a video about how to make a magical elixir. Seriously. And it works. But I just do a ton of stuff there on the Patreon. So if you like What Magic Is This, this is all I'm going to say. If you like What Magic Is This, and you want to see me continue to do this, because this is my job, and you'd like to listen to it for a few more years, please sign up to the Patreon. It is only $7 a month. I know that other streaming services that do a lot more and have a lot more money, it's, just a few bucks more than what I'm asking for. But truly, it's just me, and I do everything on this podcast. And so the Patreon gives you access to a whole different show, a whole different thing, and it's awesome and great. Anyhow, I'd love to see you there. Patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to the What Magic Is This website, whatmagicisthis.com. Click on any number of the Patreon buttons there. There's a ton of them. So that's a great way of supporting. Another way, PayPal. If you support through PayPal, go to whatmagicisthis.com, click the PayPal links. You all know what it looks like. It's little 2 Ps. They're both kind of blue or something like that. I don't know. Click that. You can donate $5, $10, $20, any amount. It all goes back into making this show run and just pay the bills. Truthfully, I'm going to give it to you straight. If you donate through the PayPal, it goes into helping me make this show. And I've actually had a few people recently. I want to mention Lisa, once again, Dominique, and Carl. Thank you so much for donating through the PayPal. you're helping me buy this new equipment that I'm using right now, and I'm loving what I'm doing. I'm testing. I feel like a kid again because I get to play with new technology, and I'm really enjoying that. So if you donate through PayPal, it goes right back into the show and helping me make this thing sound as good as it does. And I think it sounds pretty good. It sounds quite nice. So yes, supporting through PayPal would be appreciated as well. And the last way of supporting me is to show your support by buying some of my merchandise. I got stickers, notebooks, tote bags. I've got t-shirts, hoodies. Some people kind of leapt down my throat last time when I was like, nah, tapestries. Who uses tapestries? And somebody, a Patreon supporter, literally asked me for an invite to come back on the Discord to show me that they love tapestries. That's commitment. That's love right there. So I respect that. I respect the tapestry hustle. I take it back. Cool people do like tapestries, and they also like fanny packs. Anyhow, I don't have tapestries available in my merch store anyways, but I have a ton of stuff. Just go there, head to my website, click on the menu, go to the merch button, and then you can find all kinds of stuff there. I've got about 9 designs up there. Most of them are made by me. It's wonderful. I would love to see your support that way. I don't see very much money, but it's great to see you out and about with your things, doing your little magical journals. And there was a geomancy journal there as well. That's really cool. Somebody did that. And anyhow, that's another way of supporting the show. But the place I really want to see, the place I'd love to see you, because I want you to hear what I do, my best stuff. I truly think my best material is at this point only available to 330 people. My best stuff. It's a bit of a shame. Anyhow, I would love for you to join the Patreon. Come on down, $7 American a month. So much great stuff, and I truly love making my Patreon offerings. Anyhow, all of these things, this entire spiel, everything is available at whatmagicisthis.com. Head there, you wizard, you. Guys, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And again, we just scratched the surface. Hopefully at some point in the future, if I want to do another, because I might have to. I mean, truthfully, I'm probably going to get a lot of emails. If I thought I was getting a lot of emails about Enochian Magic before this episode, I'm probably going to get even more now. So
You didn't talk about this part.
that's
You didn't
right.
talk about that part.
Yeah, pretty much. So I would hope that at some point in the future, I was to ask you both to come on the show, you guys would hope to jump back on and mix it up with me once more, because I'd really appreciate that. But
Oh, absolutely. That would be great.
Yep, I seconded. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. It just feels like we just got into it, and it's already been 2 hours of talking. So I'm gonna shut the mic off. I'm gonna have a shower. I just got back from camping, so I'm extra salty today. The ocean, obviously, but oh man, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and thank you, listeners. That's the show. Everybody, come on back to What Magic Is This? We'll talk about more of this crazy, scrying, angelic, weird, barbarous sounding thing that we like to call magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, and the supernatural. Until then, I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay curious, and to stay luminous. Until then, goodbye, everybody. Ta-ta.